Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live. Talk radio without the static. Email your questions and comments to lynncullenshow@gmail.com. And now your host, Lynn Cullen.
And a good morning to you. Dreary, wet Monday in December, the 9th, to be specific. Boy, oh boy. Mondays. Mondays. Always so much that's happened in the interim since last we spoke. And that gives us, of course, an awful lot of fodder. I'm not sure where your heads are at or where you're, what you want me to be speaking about. I continue to avoid as much as possible our incoming president and his blatherings, but of course it becomes impossible. But I find it so, and I'm sure I'm not alone with this, I find it so difficult to see him, to hear him. It's slightly more palatable, that's the wrong word actually, to read about what he's saying, and therefore at least be somewhat up to speed. But with him, and what we've learned is being up to speed is a fool's errand, and is part of his MO to keep us chasing all of the nonsensical crap that emanates from him. So I'm just as much as possible trying to avoid it, and hoping I'm not losing track in general. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. Let's start with the most astonishing to me, or not, story that is ongoing, that broke last Thursday, right before the show began. And I said something about it on the show, and that was the bold, daylight, public assassination in Manhattan of the CEO of United Healthcare, or whatever. Yeah, I think. And I mean, it was, and because from the beginning it was clear that it was targeted, that it wasn't some, random drive-by, wrong place, wrong time situation, that it was pretty astonishing, and astonishing on a lot of fronts. We're not seeing in this country, where gun violence is so ubiquitous, we are not seeing CEOs generally being the targets. Our children, I recall saying on Thursday, our children being shot in schools, that barely gets us to, turn on the news. Oh, that again. But this was different. And since then, of course, it has become a fascinating, I guess, study in our culture, our country, our economics, our healthcare system, our embrace of violence, our rage, you name it. our surveillance society. And there's so many things that this has brought up. And whoever this killer is, I have little doubt at some point he will be identified. And he will be, for some, obviously, we've learned, a folk hero, a Robin Hood of this new Gilded Age. He will be seen as somebody who, in fact, struck back for the little guys all over the country that are constantly being, well, ripped off by the powerful and the rich. I mean, I have to admit, I was not totally surprised by this reaction. And it's a reaction that is different than any other in that it wasn't driven by the usual provocateurs, really. It was a showing of just what's the word? Was a showing of grassroots rage and then delight, which is the scary part in some respects, at the murder of this man who ceases to become a human. He is simply a avatar of the powerful. And he was struck down. And the people cheered. And this, again, as I said, not totally surprising. This is an angry country. And its anger is sort of unformed and directionless in many respects. I mean, one minute it will elect Donald Trump, and then the next it will start taking out perhaps his billionaire buddies. The people, the faceless, nameless folk, are really angry. And now the rich, the filthy rich, are scared. That part I like, frankly. I like that their wealth, while it buys them security, can't really buy them emotional security. And that they're having to sort of pen themselves up, granted in luxury. And for those who have said for years that we're living in something very akin to the Gilded Age, when the filthy rich then were, many of them concentrated right here in Pittsburgh and in New York. Carnegie, Frick, Vanderbilt, Rockefeller. And their wealth and riches came from brutalizing ordinary people, using their labor, ill-paid, not caring if they died while making them more and more money, and so many did. And workers then, American workers then, were enraged. I mean, so much of the history of Pittsburgh, the Homestead Strike, the New York anarchist, Berkman, coming here to Pittsburgh and attempting to assassinate Henry Clay Frick. And it's the difference now is that while it's, I don't know what the difference is, I don't know. Again, can't see the forest for the trees, but the difference, it seems to me, given that our government is wholly in the hands of authoritarians and billionaires, I'm not holding out hope that there will be any reform coming as it did after the excesses of the Gilded Age. I think the powerful and the rich will continue to consolidate their power. You know, I have to just say, getting off this for a minute, the one thing that I am just sick at heart about as I read the news is the fact that quite clearly a loathsome person like Elon Musk can, by virtue of his wealth, literally buy our government. I mean, it's mind-blowing. And it's not just him, it's all the billionaires around him that have found a warmth in the company of Donald Trump and his White House. And the amount of money that they are willing to proffer is endless, bottomless, in perpetuity to keep Trump and themselves in control. I don't think the word oligarchy comes even close to defining what we are seeing going on here. It is just the wholesale selling of our national power and treasure to a few men. The corruption that will ensue, atop of the corruption that already exists, is mind-boggling. Mind-boggling. The fact that Elon Musk has been given this job of making the government more efficient, which is bull. But this is a guy who more tax dollars are funneled into this guy's pockets than I suspect any other being. He is essentially now NASA. He is our space program. He is behind the satellite links of God knows how many countries on Earth. His power globally and geopolitically, by virtue of his wealth and what he owns, is I, it's awesome. And there is no way you can have a functional democracy or even anything approaching it with this kind of concentration of wealth and power in the hands of so few. So, my despair, it doesn't seem to be so much about Trump himself anymore, but about all of these rich, awful, unformed, emotionally stunted, greedy grifters taking over our country. And so I sort of see, even though people are coming from different places, people who voted for Trump probably were cheering the assassination of this man, this symbol. People from our end of things probably feeling the same way too, chuckling at things put on social media immediately after, like, my condolences. I'm sorry, but my condolences are out of network. Right? It's a little unsettling to live in a country filled with such murderous rage, and even more so when our government has ceased to represent us. So I'm just, yeah, I don't know. As I said, I will continue to pay attention. Um, I will continue to act as much as I am able. Um, but guys, we are in a frightening time. There's been a lot of pieces written about this, of course, and I don't know. I remember once, it was right after Susan, my sister, was married. This would be in the 70s, and she and her husband were living in New York City. He was a resident at one of the hospitals there. And our family, my parents and brother, and we got together at their apartment for, I think it was Passover, not sure. And I can't remember if it was my dad or somebody saw graffiti scrawled on a building that said, "Eat the rich." And my father was appalled. And I remember the rest of us delighting in it, laughing at it, and understanding the anger behind it. But my God, that was the 70s? that was a time of a relative. I mean, that's when it started. I think that's when this new Gilded Age really started. That was the beginning of this runaway, ugly, inhumane capitalism uh, that exists. The capitalism that can never get enough. The capitalism that is about nothing other than maximization of profit, of feeding the shareholders. And damn the people. And it's been pointed out. I mean, one of the things that is feeding a lot of the rage and instability is the fact that we are living in one of those transition periods in history when the entire way structure that the world functions is changing. The industrial age is ending and the technological age has begun, and people are uprooted, jobs are lost. It's a time of incredible a sense of anxiety. And this is when demagogues arise because they have easy answers for frightened people. Um, and the Gilded Age was much the same in that too was started at a time of rapid technological change atop the industrial era. Uh, Transportation changes, the my God, the telephone, electricity, all of that. These kinds of things do destabilize. They enrich some, they impoverish others, and they change the landscape to the point where people become frightened, feel left behind, feel trampled. And who doesn't understand that? I mean, you talk to younger people now. They're cynical beyond their years, and they don't buy into all the American dream crap that we bought into. They have been alive for whatever, a few decades here and there, and they're looking around at what they have witnessed themselves. They see that they're told they need a education, and that education impoverishes them, puts them in debt before they can even get the job that is supposed to catapult them into riches. Our country ain't working for most people. And then, of course, they turn around and give the keys to the government to one of the people who doesn't give a damn about them, but knows how to sell them on his scam. It's an ugly time. My condolences are out of network. So, I have to tell you, more than one woman, and I myself, when we first saw the picture of the killer, um, I'll tell you what a lot of women did. They swooned. Uh, And that also will feed the story, this incredible story that will keep us glued. He's handsome. He's not some thuggish looking killer. He's handsome with a beautiful smile. And thus far, despite the fact that we've all seen him, he has evaded the law. God, I don't know. So I think it was the New York Times front page, maybe Saturday, that had stories that, again, just absolutely show the corruption of our country, of our government. There was one about all about Musk and the others all, being at the White House and just divvying up spoils and just having a ball. There was another of one of the richest men in the world. He's the 10th richest in the US. Jensen Huang, chief executive of NVIDIA, and how he legally was able to avoid paying $8 billion in taxes. And all of this because our corrupted Congress continues to write laws that allow for billionaires to not pay their fair share. You might have to pay an estate tax if you have enough money at the end of your life. Your heirs will have to pay an estate tax. But if you have even more than enough money, the odds are you won't. Because there are so many loopholes that have been put into it. So these ultra rich people can continue to amass their wealth at our expense, by the way. The revenue from the estate tax in the last 20 years hasn't changed a bit. The country's not getting any more in 2024 than they got in 2000, even though the wealth of the richest Americans has more than quadrupled. So that was one story. And it just, it makes you crazy because you pay, I pay. And there was another story about an industry that takes sewage, sludge, turns it into fertilizer and sells it to farmers for their crops. But guess what? It's now been shown that that fertilizer is dangerous, harmful, filled with forever chemicals, and farmers are starting to find that their land has been contaminated, their water has been contaminated, their crops are contaminated, and their livestock are contaminated, and the industrialists who made money selling this literal crap are now taking the money they've made and lining the pockets of congressmen to make sure that they will not be able to be sued by the farmers. Because the rich can do that. They can poison the land. They can devastate a farmer. and then they can buy security from consequences from our corrupted government. All of that was on the front page of the New York Times, and that is not a good way to start your morning, I just want to say. And I want to say this, an unbelievable story is this Assad going down, which hard not to just be jubilant about that evil son of a bitch, that murderer. He killed so many of his own people, the mind boggles. He made refugees of millions of them. And of course, he flies away in his private jet, leaving behind people who did his bidding who will now probably be killed. But he, as these rich marauders and killers almost always do, gets away with it. And it's not that you can necessarily cheer the people who've overthrown him, because they're a bunch of they're killers as well. Who knows? We'll find out more, but I have very little hope that they will prove to be much better. But you can, while being happy about Assad running, scared, I'm sure with all his filthy lucre in tow, also hurt by this are two countries that are our enemies, and that's obviously Iran and Russia, the two countries that backed him and backed him up and used his country as a base in the Middle East. And it's actually Israel that is probably, I would say, Israel and Ukraine, right, are the two countries that the Syrian people should thank for this extraordinary thing that happened, this lightning speed. After 60 years, all of a sudden in a week, bang, gone. And it's because the big boys that kept him in power have all been weakened. Israel weakening Hezbollah and Hamas, and Iran and Russia being weakened by its war in Ukraine and unable to just provide the help, because they themselves, Iran and Russia, are struggling to a certain extent. And our incoming president says we should keep out of it. You see, this is the danger of this kind of isolationist. I mean, we can't keep out of it. Does he even know we have troops in Syria? I didn't know we had troops in Syria. I had a friend over a few nights ago, and she said that she'd heard from a friend of hers whose son was in Syria in the military, and she was so scared for him. And I said, "We don't have troops in Syria." Little did I know we have troops in Syria. We have troops in places you can't even imagine. But yeah, There's no way of steering clear of that roiling part of the world. Just try. Guys, I don't know. I saw that the Speaker of the House, this lightweight sycophant Johnson, has said in no uncertain terms that the new Congress will be cutting all funding for PBS and Planned Parenthood. And I'm thinking they were still giving money to Planned Parenthood. But if they were, they ain't anymore. Maybe they were getting some money that wasn't, most of Planned Parenthood is not abortion, it's preventing abortion. It's birth control. And it's making birth control and gynecological care available to poorer women, low income women. And so, if you're a lower income woman who gets your gynecological care from Planned Parenthood, yeah, you might be finding that much more difficult now. And PBS, stop and think of that. I'm sure you've seen it, that video of Fred Rogers. Last time Republicans were feeling their muscle and wanting to eviscerate public broadcasting, and how Fred Rogers went before a congressional committee, and just ad-libbed, explained what his program, this little show he did that got its funds from PBS, this little show he did for children in Pittsburgh. And it was so moving that this hardened chair of the committee, a guy named Pastore, was practically in tears. He had been very grumpy prior to Fred speaking, and in fact told Fred, "You got some long speech there. I've about heard it. I've heard everything. I'm sick of listening." And Fred said, "Well, let me just," and that's when he began to just ad lib. And Fred Rogers that day single-handedly saved funding for public broadcasting. That ain't going to happen this time. That is not going to happen. So here's just getting off all of this stuff, if you don't mind. Those of you who have the New York Times might have seen this. I just want to share it with you because it has nothing to do with all of this horror. It's football. Okay. And the New York Times yesterday, had a full page story about Mike Tomlin. And all it was quotes from players, people who were currently on the team, people who used to be on the team, people who have played for Mike Tomlin. And it is, for those of you who didn't see it, it is such a love letter from the players to this longest tenured NFL coach. what they did is they simply asked players to tell them stories. Tell me some story. Tell me your best Tomlin story. It can be when he called you out, it can be something that, really mattered to you. And it is so clear that, unlike, I suspect, an awful lot of teams, the Steeler players are so lucky in that they literally love their coach because they can tell he loves them on an individual basis. He has a relationship with every single player. Ike Taylor, cornerback, tells the Times, I broke my forearm in week 3, and he said, don't worry, you're going to be back. And then he kissed me on the forehead. That meant a lot. Another, Isaac Redman, says, a lot of guys that come over from other teams, they say, man, you guys don't know how lucky you have it with him. He's a straight shooter, says Ike Taylor. I love this. We call it 6 o'clock. Tomlin is 6 o'clock. He says Coach T is straight up and down. 6 o'clock. A straight shooter. Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Willie Cullen says, I'm not trying to be over romantic about this or weird about it, but he saved me. He saved my life. And he was talking about the fact that he had a bad injury that ended his season, and he went into a really dark place. He was in a depression. He was drinking. He could hardly get out of bed. And Tomlin came to him and said, trying to look for it. He said, I want you to travel with the team. And that doesn't happen. He saw how he said, you just stay with us because you'll be back. He said, no, man, we're not going to leave you behind. He saved my life. And then, just showing that he's not all sweetness, Cullen tells a story about bumping into Tomlin on his way to a meeting, and Tomlin says, you're late, aren't you? And the player says, yeah, I gave him a giggle like, yeah, you're right. And he goes, you can't lead from the back. So if you want to be considered a leader, you can't lead from the back. I'll talk to you later. And then he walked away. I don't know. You cannot read this stuff and not see that they just love him. A few more. You don't just buy in because he gives a great speech. You buy into him because you can tell he cares. Here's B.J. Finney, an offensive lineman. My grandfather had 2 heart attacks and 5 strokes inside of 3 days at the end of training camp, and I went up to him and said, hey, Coach T, this is what I've got going on. Can I go home? He looked at me like, why are you even asking? Get out of here. Normally I wouldn't be doing this, but I just need, I just need something nice. And Coach T, 6 o'clock, makes me feel good. Another story from one of the players. We had a young offensive lineman who was on the bench, but he had the potential to start. But this kid's personality, I don't know. He was an introvert. He always wanted to be left alone, real quiet to himself. And Coach T says, "Hey, to me, come here. I need you to be mindful of him," he says, talking about the introvert, the player. He says, "You talk to him and let me know how he's doing. Not just physically, emotionally. I just kind of need you to be by his side." And then Tomlin goes on to tell the player he's asking to help the other player, guys like that, they're not just quiet because of their personality. There's probably other things going on behind the curtain. And the player telling the story says, "What was so amazing is that this is during a game. The defense was on the field. There were a million things going on. And he was talking to me about our second string guard and telling me to make sure he was okay emotionally." And one of the other players, Bryant McFadden, just says he's just overly observant of every member of the team. And the final two things I'll share with you. He says, Finney says, "I loved every minute that I could play for that man." And another, "I love him to death, really." So that's just, a lot of people in this town, for some reason, like to hate Mike Tomlin. And I don't know how you root for players while hating the coach that they love. I I don't know where that disconnect comes in. I really don't. So I couldn't watch the game yesterday. My cable went out just in time for the game and then stayed out. And every time I called to say what's going on, I couldn't get a human. I just got somebody saying, "We are aware from where you are calling that there is an outage in your area. We are working on it and we'll blah, 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 blah. Do not, no representative will be able to help you further." Unfriggin' believable. Speaking of the last robber barons, here's a book recommendation from someone, Meet You in Hell. Andrew Carnegie, Henry Clay Frick. Written by Les Standiford. Oh, I've got a recommendation too for those of you who listen to books, something I don't do, but I've been doing for just one because my friend wrote it, and then it got then the New York Times said it was one of the 10 best podcasts. They called it a podcast in this year. So I guess it's where you get podcasts, but it's an audio book as far as I'm concerned. It's just this new genre. Um, so it's not it. It's called Cement City. I maybe have I mentioned this before? Cement City, and it's about Denora, PA. And the author is my friend Jean Marie Laskus, who I've had on the show more than once by virtue of her extraordinary reporting. Um, she's the one who really broke uh, the NFL wide open in terms of the concussion thing that they were denying, CTE. And her book, well, it was first, I think, an article, Concussion, and then a book um, about it that began here with Mike Webster's brain. Um, and she also is the one, I think I had her on when she did a story on Obama's presidency and the last how he had an entire department of people who did nothing but answer letters from Americans that were written to him. And each day, 10 letters would be sent to the private residence in the White House. And he would read 10 of these chosen letters, representative letters, every night before he went to bed. And Jean Marie wrote a piece on that. And I think I did tell you that Obama sent her a note, which I've seen and is mind blowing because it flat out says, "Dear Jean Marie, you wrote my favorite story about my presidency." It's from him written. Thank you. You wrote them. I thought, oh God, hang it up right now, Jean. But she didn't. She went to Denora and bought a house, a concrete house in Denora, and stayed there for 3 years during the pandemic mostly, and wrote and recorded. The reason it's a podcast is she went with an audio person, and so they talked to people. And then Jean put it all together and narrates it. And as I said, the New York Times said it's one of the 10 best podcasts you can listen to. It's broken down into 10 chapters. I just started it this weekend. And I'm not a listener kind of person, which is odd since I'm asking you to be, but it's just not how I take in a lot of information. I'm an eyeball person, but I started Cement City, and man, it's good. So I'm just suggesting you read it. One of the things I found out about the concrete house she bought is it's one of a number of concrete houses that were built in Denora at the early parts of the 1900s by, get this, Thomas Edison. Edison, after he did all the, inventing stuff, changing the world that he did, he got into concrete. He was certain concrete was the next thing. And he, I don't know, said, she tells us that he had a concrete highway built somewhere. He thought concrete could do absolutely everything. And then he invented a way to pour a concrete house. And I guess it was some subsidiary of US Steel that he contracted with to build a bunch of these houses, I guess for the workers, and it was called Cement City. And the houses are still there because I got news for you. A cement house doesn't go anywhere. And Jean ended up buying one and living in it. And that in and of itself is extraordinary. The cement houses and Edison. He had a way of, really, he invented a machine that could pour a foundation in a day and then let it, set for 3. Then they'd pour the first floor and it would set in 3. Then they'd pour the second story and it would set in 3 days. And it's pretty much done. And they planted a sycamore tree in front of every cement house. And every cement house had a built-in pencil sharpener in the basement, and hookups for indoor washer and dryer at a time when people just didn't have that kind of thing. That's just one little tidbit in this book about a city that is infamous only because of the pollution and smog that killed so many people there in the 50s. Yeah, and Russ Bell is just saying Denora is the place where, 48, you think? I thought it was 50 something. You might be right. In 48, a killer smog killed 20 people and made 6,000 others sick. They have a museum there about it. And the second chapter of Jean's podcast is she goes to the smog museum. But she's mostly there trying to figure out why people stay. Why do people stay in a place like this? And so it's fascinating to hear the voices of people. And I think the story is going to take some very interesting turns, just judging from what the trailer I saw said. So I just have to tell you, you can get it wherever your podcasts are. Cement City, go for it. If you're a person who likes listening to things in your ear while you're doing stuff, I can't think of a more entertaining, literally, and entertaining thing than Jean's latest iteration of a book, Cement City. Okay, good. I managed to finish out the show and not talk anymore about the horrors of reality. So that really a genuine, and not just that she's my friend, it's just wonderful. The New York Times said, okay, and they listen to a gazillion audio books or podcasts. I don't know what the hell the difference is. I don't know what anything is anymore. I'm one of those people just in a general state of confusion and destabilization because of the rapid change in everything. And too old to keep up, but not too old to be pissed off, right? All right, that's it for me, and I'll be back tomorrow, God willing, and I should have my sister in tow. Okay, so you guys have a good one, and stay dry, stay warm, stay whatever.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Thursday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper or its advertisers.